Good evening. I'm Terrible Troll. Tonight we continue with our reading A Time for Trolls, Fairy Tales from Norway, told by Asbjornsen Moe, translated by Joan Roll-Hansen. Please don't forget to rub upon the like button, subscribe if you wish, and leave your comments below. Without further ado, let's move into tonight's read. Per, Paul, and Espen Askelad. There once was a man who had 3 sons, Per and Paul and Espen Askelad, but he was as poor as a church mouse, and his sons were all he had. So he told the 3 of them time and time again that they would have to go out into the world to earn their bread, for if they stayed home they had only a life of hunger before them. Far away from the poor man's cottage the king had his farm, and right outside the king's window an oak had sprung up, and this oak was so mighty and tall that it shut out the light from the king's dwelling. The king had promised a great deal of money to whoever could cut down the oak, but no one could do it, because as soon as one piece was chopped off the trunk, 2 more grew there on the spot. And the king also wanted a well dug to supply water all year round. Each of his neighbors owned a well, but he had none, and he felt it was a disgrace. To anyone who could dig a well to provide water all year, the king had promised money and other riches, but no one could do it because the royal farm was high up on a hill, and whenever they started digging they struck hard rock a few inches down. Now the king had made up his mind that he wanted these tasks done, and he let it be proclaimed from the church doors all over the land that whoever could fell the great oak beside his dwelling and make him a well providing water all the year should be given his daughter in marriage and half of his kingdom. And I can assure you that there were many who were anxious to try their luck, but for all their hacking and chopping and all their burrowing and digging they got no further. Every stroke made the oak thicker and thicker, and the rocky hillside showed no sign of getting any softer. The time came when the 3 brothers wished to set out and try their fortune too. Their father was well pleased, for he thought that even if they did not win the princess and half the kingdom, they might find service in the household of a worthy man, and that was as much as he had hoped for. And when the brothers made up their minds to go to the king's farm, their father gave his consent at once, and Per and Paul and Espen Askelad set off together. After a while they came to a slope covered with spruce, and above it was a tall steep hill, and far up they could hear a sound of chopping. "I wonder what it is we can hear chopping on the hill up there," said Espen Askelad. "You're a marvel at wondering," said Per and Paul. "Surprising it isn't to hear a woodcutter at work on the hill." "I think I'd like to see what it is," said Espen Askelad, and off he went. "If you're such a booby, it won't do you any harm to learn the walk as well," his brothers shouted after him. But Espen did not bother about them. He climbed up the hillside and followed the sound of chopping, and at last he found it came from an axe that was busily cutting the trunk of a pine tree. "Good day," said Espen Askelad. "I see you're busy chopping." "Yes, I've been here chopping a long, long time, waiting for you," answered the axe. "Well, here I am," said Espen, and he took the axe and knocked off the handle and packed both axe and handle in his knapsack. When he joined his brothers below, they teased and laughed at him. "What was the surprise up on the hill?" they said. "Oh, it was only an axe we heard," said Espen. Having walked on farther, they came to a rocky cliff where they could hear a sound of hammering and digging. "I wonder what it is we can hear hammering and digging on the cliff up there," said Espen Askelad. "If you're such a marvel at wondering," said Per and Paul, "haven't you ever noticed woodpeckers hammering at trees before?" "Yes, but I'd like to go see what it is," said Espen, and the more they laughed and made fun of him, the less he cared. He climbed up to the cliff, and when he got there he saw a pick hammering and digging. "Good day," said Espen Askelad. "I see you're hammering and digging all alone." "Yes," said the pick. "I've been here hammering and digging a long, long time, waiting for you." "Well, here I am," said Espen once more, and he took the pick and knocked off the handle and put it in his knapsack. Then he walked down to join his brothers. "You must have seen something wonderful on the cliff up there," said Per and Paul. "Nothing special. It was only a pick we heard," answered Espen. They went on for a while until they came to a brook. By now they were all thirsty after their journey, and they lay down beside the brook to drink. "Now I wonder just where this water comes from," said Espen Askelad. "Now I wonder whether you're quite right in your head," said Per and Paul too. "If you're not mad already, you'll be mad soon enough with all the wondering about this and that. Where does the brook come from? Haven't you ever seen water flowing from a spring in the ground?" "Yes, but I'd still like to see where it comes from," said Espen. He started running upstream, and though his brothers shouted and laughed at him, he took no notice and went on running. Much farther up the brook became smaller and smaller, and he kept on following it until at last he saw a big walnut out of which the water bubbled and flowed. "Good day," said Espen once more. "I see you're bubbling and singing all alone." "Oh yes," said the walnut. I've been here bubbling and singing a long, long time, waiting for you." "Well, here I am," said Espen. He took a piece of moss and stuffed it in the hole so that the water could not run out, and he put the walnut in his knapsack and went down again to join his brothers. "And now you've seen where the water comes from. It must have been a strange sight," said Per and Paul together. "It was just running out of a hole," said Espen, and the other two laughed and made fun of him once more, but Espen did not let that worry him. "Still, I enjoyed seeing it," he said. They walked on, and they came to the king's farm, but since everyone in the kingdom had heard they could win the princess and half the kingdom if they cut down the great oak and dug a well for the king, so many had come to try their luck that the oak was twice as huge as it had been to begin with. For you will remember that 2 new pieces grew for every one that was chopped off, and so the king had now decreed that all those who tried and could not fell the oak should be banished to an island and have their ears cropped. But the 2 elder brothers were not afraid of what lay in store, for they were quite sure they could cut down the oak. The eldest brother, Per, was the first to try his luck, but he fared the same as all of the others who had chopped the oak. For every piece he cut off, 2 new ones grew instead, and the king's men seized him and cropped his ears and set him out to the island. Then Paul wanted his turn, and his lot was the same. After he had hacked 2 or 3 times and everyone saw the oak growing thicker, the king's men took him and put him on the island and cropped his ears even closer, because they thought he ought to have learnt his lesson. Then Espen and Askelad wanted to try. "If you are so eager to look like a marked sheep, we can crop your ears at once and spare you further trouble," said the king, who was angry at the thought of the elder brothers. "I'd rather like to have a try first," said Espen, and they had to let him. He brought out his axe from his knapsack and fixed it on the handle again. "Hew and cut," said Espen to the axe, and it chopped and chopped, so the splinters flew, and it was not long before the oak was on the ground. After this, Espen took his pick and fastened on the handle. "Dig and delve," said Espen, and the pick hammered and dug and threw up earth and stones, and there was no stopping the sinking of the well this time. When it was deep and broad enough, Espen Askelad took out his walnut, set it in the corner at the bottom, and pulled out the moss. "Bubble and flow," said Espen, and the water came spouting forth from the hole in the nut, and in no time the well was full to the brim. And so Espen felled the oak that shut out the light from the king's window, and he made a well for the king's farm, and he won the princess and half the kingdom as the king had promised. But it was just as well for Per and Paul that they had lost their ears. Otherwise they would have had to heard everyone saying over and over again that Espen Askelad had not wandered in vain. The Boy and the Devil. Once there was a boy walking along a road, cracking nuts. He came upon one that was worm-eaten, and just then he met the devil. "Is it true what they say," said the boy, "that the devil can make himself as small as he will and force his way through a pinprick?" "Yes," answered the devil. "Let me see you creep into this nut, then," said the boy, and the devil did so. When he crept right in through the wormhole, the boy pushed a twig into it. "Now I've got you," he said, and put the nut in his pocket. Further along the road he came to a forge. There he went in and asked the smith if he would crack open the nut for him. "Yes, that's easy enough," replied the smith, and he took his smallest hammer, placed the nut on the anvil, and hit it, but it would not break. So he took a bigger hammer, but that was not heavy enough either, and then he tried an even bigger one, and that was no good. Then the smith got angry and seized his sledgehammer. "I'll smash you if it's the last thing I do," said he, and struck with all his might. And then the nut burst into splinters, with such a roaring crash that half the roof flew off, and it seemed as if the whole smithy would tumble down. "The flaming devil must have been in the nut," said the smith. "He was," said the boy. The 2 Stepsisters. Once upon a time there was a couple who married, and each of them already had a daughter. The elder daughter, the wife's child, was lazy and idle and would never do a single thing. The younger daughter, the husband's child, was clever and willing to work, yet she could never manage to please her stepmother, and both her stepmother and her elder sister wished to be rid of her. One day the 2 sisters were told to spin beside the well. The elder sister was to spin flax, but the younger sister was given nothing but bristles. "I know you're always so quick and smart," said the elder sister. "All the same, I'm not afraid of trying a spinning match with you." And it was agreed that the first one to break her thread was to be put in the well. It was not long before the younger sister's thread broke, and she had been thrown down the well. But when she fell to the bottom she did not hurt herself, and around her on all sides she saw a beautiful green meadow. She walked through the meadow and came to a brush fence, which she thought she would climb over. "Oh, don't tread on me too hard," said the brush fence, "and then I shall help you some time." And she made herself as light as a feather, and trod with such care that she scarcely touched it at all. And she went on farther until she came to a brindled cow with a milk pail hanging on its horns. It was a big pretty cow, and its udders were full and swollen. "Oh, please milk me," said the cow. "I'm bursting with milk. Drink as much as you like, and pour the rest over my hooves, and sometime I shall help you in return." The girl did as the cow asked. She hardly touched its teats when the milk spurted into the pail. She drank and quenched her thirst. The rest she poured over the cow's hoofs, and she put the pail back on its horns. After she had walked on again through the meadow, she met a huge ram that had long, thick wool trailing after it, and on one of its horns there hung a pair of shears. "Oh, do clip my wool," said the ram. "I'm dragging along all this heavy wool, and I'm so hot I'm near to stifling. Take as much as you like and wind the rest around my neck, and I shall help you some time later." She was ready to help at once, and the ram climbed up onto her lap. It lay so still, and she sheared it so neatly that its skin did not receive the slightest scratch. Then she took all she wanted of the wool and wound the rest around the ram's neck. A little farther on she came to an apple tree so loaded with apples that all of its boughs were bent to the ground, and by the trunk was a little staff. "Oh, please pick my apples," said the tree, "so my boughs can be straight again, for it hurts me to stand so crooked. But do treat me gently, and take care not to spoil my branches. Eat as many apples as you'd like, and place the rest by my root, and I shall help you in return." She picked those she could reach, and she took the staff and shook down the other apples carefully. She ate her fill and stored the rest neatly at the foot of the tree. She went a long, long way until she reached a large farm where there lived a witch and her daughter. There she went in and asked for service. "Oh, it's no use coming here," said the witch. "We've had a lot of servants, but none of them have been any good." Still, she kept on asking politely to be taken on, and in the end they let her be their servant. And the witch gave her a sieve and told her to fetch water in it. She thought it foolish to fetch water in a sieve. All the same she went out, and when she came to the well, the little bird sang, "Press in clay and straw there lay, press in clay and straw there lay." She did so, and she could carry water in the sieve well enough. But then when she got home with the water, the witch looked at the sieve and said, "This is some hanky-panky trick." The witch told her next to go to the cow stable and clear away the manure and do the milking. But when she got there, she found a shovel so big and heavy that she could not lift it at all, let alone work with it, and now she had no idea what to do. But the little bird sang to her to take the broom and sweep out a little, and all the rest of the manure would follow after. She did so, and she had scarcely set to work with the broom when the whole stable was as clean as if it had been cleared and swept all over. After that she began milking the cows, but they were so restless that they had kicked and stamped, and she could get no milk from them at all. And then the bird sang, "A tiny jet, a drop so small, send to the songsters, send to them all." And she did so. She sprayed a tiny jet of milk out to the little birds, and all the cows stood still and let her milk them, and neither stamped nor kicked. None of them was stirred an inch. When the witch saw her come in with milk, she said, "This is some hanky-panky trick, but now you can take this black wool and wash it white." The girl had no idea how to manage this, for she had never seen anyone succeed in washing black wool white. Though she said nothing, she took the will and carried it to the well. Then the little bird sang to her to dip the wool in the large tub standing there, and she would soon get it white. "Well," said the witch, when she came back with the wool, "it's no use keeping you here. You can do everything, and you'll end up by worrying the life out of me. It's best for you to be off." And so the witch placed 3 caskets before her, 1 red, 1 green, and 1 blue. So these she could choose any one as payment for her service. She did not know which one to choose, but the little bird sang, "Let the green one be, let the red one be, take the blue one, with crosses 3. And she chose the blue one, as the little birds told her in their song. "Curse you," cried the witch, "you'll pay for this." Just as the younger sister was leaving the farmhouse, the witch hurled a bolt of red-hot iron at her, and at once she darted behind the door and hid so that it did miss her. Because the little birds had told her beforehand what to do, she set off as far as she could, but when she got as far as the apple tree, she heard a rumbling sound on the road behind her. That was the witch and her daughter who were after her, and the girl was so afraid she did not know which way to turn. "Come over here," said the apple tree, "and I shall help you. Come and hide among my branches, because if they get hold of you, they will take your casket away and tear you to pieces." She hid there, and the next thing she knew was that the witch and the daughter had caught up with her. "Have you seen a girl pass this way?" asked the witch. "Oh, yes," answered the apple tree. "A girl ran past here a while ago, but by now she must be so far away that you could not reach her." And the witch turned back and went home again. The girl continued on her way, but when she got as far as the ram, she heard such a dreadful rumbling that she did not know what to do. She was so frightened. She knew it was the witch, who had changed her mind and run after her again. "Come over here, I can help you," said the ram. "Hide under my wool, so they cannot see you, otherwise they will take away your casket and tear you to pieces." And the next moment the witch came hurrying along. "Have you seen a girl pass by here?" she asked the ram. "Oh, yes," said the ram. "I saw a girl a while ago, but she was running so fast that you will not catch up with her." And the witch turned back and went home. When the girl had got to where the cow was, she heard a loud rumbling along the road once more. "Come over here," said the cow, "and I shall help you. Hide under my udders, otherwise the witch will come and take away your casket and tear you to pieces." She was not long in coming. "Have you seen a girl pass by here?" said the witch to the cow. "Yes, I did see a girl a little while ago, but she is far away now. She was running so quickly I don't think you can catch up with her," said the cow, and the witch turned back and went home again. After the girl had gone a long, long way, she was not far from the brush fence. She heard such a rumble behind her on the road that she grew full of fear, because she guessed that it was the witch who had started following her again. "Come over here and let me help you," said the brush fence. "Creep under my twigs so they cannot see you, otherwise they will take away your casket and tear you to pieces." And she hid quickly under the twigs of the fence. "Have you seen a girl around here?" said the witch to the brush fence. "No, I haven't seen any girl," answered the brush fence, and it was so angry that it rustled and cracked, and it made itself so tall that there was no hope of anyone climbing over it, and all the witch could do was turn back and go home. When the younger sister came home safe and sound, the stepmother and her daughter were more envious of her than they had ever been. She was now much prettier and looked so lovely that it was a joy to see her. She was not allowed to be in the house, but was turned out and sent to the pigsty, which was to be her home. Here she washed everything clean and neat, and then opened her casket to see what she had been given in payment for her service. And as she lifted the lid, there appeared so much gold and silver, and so many precious things, that the walls and ceilings were all hung with them at once, and the pigsty was grander than the finest royal dwelling. When the stepmother and her daughter saw all this, they were quite beside themselves, and set to questioning her about the sort of work she had had. "Oh," she said, "you can guess what it was. Like from my wages, the household and the mistress I serve were such that you had never seen the like." And there and then the elder sister was eager to be off and work as a servant, so that she could earn a casket of gold too. And they sat down to spin again, but this time the elder sister was to spin bristles and the younger sister flax, and whoever broke her thread first was to be put in the well. And soon enough the elder sister broke her thread, as you can imagine, and then she was thrown down the well. And the same thing happened to her. She fell to the bottom but did not get hurt, and she found herself in a beautiful green meadow. After she had walked a while she came to the brush fence. "Don't tread on me too hard, and I shall help you in return," said the brush fence. "Oh, a fine lot I care about a bundle of twigs," she said, and trampled on the fence so heavily that it snapped and cracked. In a while she came to the cow that was bursting with milk. "Please milk me," said the cow, "and I shall help you later. Drink as much as you like, and pour the rest over my hoofs." She did so. She milked the cow and then drank and drank, but there was none left to pour over the hoofs, and the pail she threw down on the ground and left there. After she had gone on farther, she met the ram, trailing his long wool after him. "Oh, please clip my wool, and I shall do you a good turn later," said the ram. "Take as much of the wool as you like, and wind the rest round my neck." And she did so, but she worked so clumsily that she cut off big pieces of the ram, and she took all the wool with her. Soon after she reached the apple tree that was now bowed down with fruit again. "Please pick my apples so my boughs can be straight, for it hurts me to be so crooked," said the apple tree. "But take care to treat me gently and not ruin my branches. Eat as much as you like, and place the rest neatly near my root, and I shall help you in return." She picked the nearest fruit, and she took the staff and knocked down those she could not reach, but she was careless as could be, and beat and tore down large branches. She kept on eating all she could and scattered the rest under the tree. After she had walked a while longer, she came to the farm where the witch lived. There she asked for service. The witch said that she did not want any servant girl, because either they were good-for-nothings or they were so sharp that they got hold of all she possessed. The elder sister would not give in, but insisted on entering her service, and the witch agreed to take her on as long as she proved herself useful. The first thing she had to do was fetch water in the sieve. She went to the well and poured water into the sieve, though as fast as she poured it in it ran out again, and the birds sang, "Pressing clay and straw there lay, pressing clay and straw there lay." But she did not bother about the bird song. She threw clay at the birds and frightened them all away, and she had to go home again with an empty sieve and was scolded by the witch. She was told next to clear manure from the cow stable and milk the cows. She thought such work beneath her. All the same she went into the stable, but when she got there she could not handle the shovel because it was so big. The birds told her, as they had told the younger sister, to take the broom and sweep out a little manure, and then all the rest would follow. But she seized the broom and threw it at the birds. When she started the milking, the cows were so restless that they stamped and kicked, and each time she got a little milk in the pail, they upset it. The birds sang, "A tiny jet, a drop so small, send to the songsters, send to them all." But she struck and beat the cows, and she threw all she could find at the little birds, and made much a scene. And no manure did she clear, and no milk did she get from the cows. And when she came home, she was smacked and scolded by the witch. After that she had to wash the black wool white, but she was no better at that either. The witch thought this bad enough, and she placed before her 3 caskets, one red, one green, and one blue. She told her that she had no use for her because she was a good-for-nothing, but in payment for her service she could choose whichever casket she liked. And then the birds sang, "Let the green one be, let the red one be, take the blue one with crosses 3. She took no heed of the bead's song, but chose the red one, which was brightest, and so she set out for home, and she had a peaceful journey, for no one came hurrying after her. When she reached home, her mother was as glad as could be, and they went straight into the parlor and placed the casket there. They believed that it was full of gold and silver, and they thought that the walls and the ceiling would soon be gilded all over. But the moment they opened the casket, there poured forth nothing but serpents and toads, and whenever the elder sister opened her mouth, the same thing happened. There poured out serpents and toads and all kinds of vermin, so that at last no one could be in the same house with her, and these were the wages she received for serving in the house of the witch. The Cat of Dovre. There once was a man up in Finnmark who caught a big white bear, and he set out to take it to the king of Denmark. And it so happened that he came to the mountain of Dovre on Christmas Eve, and he went into a cottage where there lived a man by the name of Halvor. Here he asked for a night's shelter for himself and his white bear. "Heaven help us all," said the cottager. "We can give no shelter to strangers tonight, for every Christmas Eve there come so many trolls here that we all have to move out of the house, and we have no roof over our own heads." "Oh, I think you can still put me up," said the man. "My bear can sleep under the stove here, and the closet will do for me." In the end he was allowed to stay. Then the family moved out, having prepared a table laden with cream porridge and live fish, and sausages and all the good things that could belong to a festive board. All of a sudden the trolls came in. Some were big and some were small. Some had long tails and some had no tails, and some had long, long noses, and they ate and they drank and they tasted all the dishes. But one of the little trolls caught sight of the white bear asleep under the stove, and he seized a piece of sausage, roasted it hot on the end of a fork, and toddled along and thrust it under the nose of the white bear, crying, "Pussy, want a sausage?" And then the white bear started up with a mighty growl and chased the whole pack of them helter-skelter out of the house. 1 year later, Halvor was in the forest on the afternoon of Christmas Eve, cutting wood for the Christmas season, for he was expecting the trolls again. While he was busy chopping, he heard a voice call from the forest, "Halvor, Halvor!" "Yes," said Halvor. "Have you still got that big cat of yours?" "Yes, she's at home asleep under the stove," said Halvor, "and now she has a litter of 7 kittens who are all much bigger and angrier than she is." "Well, we won't be coming to visit you any more," shouted the troll from the depths of the forest, and since that time the trolls have never eaten Christmas dinner at Halvor's cottage in Dovre. The 7 Foals. Once upon a time there was a poor couple who lived in a miserable cottage in the depths of the forest, and who barely managed to get enough to eat. But they had 3 sons, and the youngest was called Askelad, for he did nothing but sit by the fire poking and fiddling with the ashes. One day the eldest son said that he wished to go out to service. His parents gave him leave to go, and he wandered out into the world. He walked and walked all day, and towards evening he came to the farm of a king. There stood the king on the steps of his porch, and asked him where he was going. "Oh, I'm looking for service, master," said the lad. "Will you serve in my household and keep watch over my 7 foals?" asked the king. "If you can watch them a whole day and tell me in the evening what they eat and drink, I'll give you my daughter and half my kingdom. But if you fail, I'll cut 3 red strips off your back." The lad thought this work sounded easy enough and agreed to do it. Early the next morning, as dawn was breaking, the groom let loose the 7 foals. Off they bounded with the lad at their heels, and you could be sure they sped far over the hill and dale and through the wood and mire. After the lad had been racing along behind them for some time, he began to feel tired, and though he kept up the pace a while longer, he had soon enough and was ready to give up the task. Then he came to a cleft rock where an old woman sat spinning on a distaff. When she caught sight of the lad, sweating and running after the foals, she called out, "Come, my fair son, come here and let me louse you." And the lad was more than willing. He settled down with the woman under the rock and put his head in her lap, and she loused him all day while he lay idling there. When evening approached, the lad wanted to be off. "I might as well stroll home again," he said, "because it's not much use going back to the king's farm." "Wait till it gets a little darker," said the woman. "Then the king's foal will pass by here again, and you can run back with them. Nobody knows that you have been lying here all day instead of watching the foals." When they arrived, she gave the lad a flask of water and a clump of moss. These he was to show to the king, and he was to say that these were the food and drink of the 7 foals. "Have you kept faithful watch all day, my lad?" said the king, when the lad came before him in the evening. "Of course I have," said the lad. "Can you tell me, then, what my 7 foals eat and drink?" asked the king. And the lad showed him the flask of water and the clump of moss that the woman had given him. "Here you see their food, and here you see their drink," said the lad. But the king understood well enough how faithfully he had watched, and he was so angry that he gave orders for the lad to be turned out and sent home on the spot. And first he was to have 3 red strips cut off his back and salt rubbed on the wounds. When the lad returned home, you can imagine how high his spirits were. He had gone out to service once, he said, but he would never do so again. The next day the second son said that he wished to go out into the world and try his fortune. His parents refused to let him go, and told him to take a look at his brother's back, but the lad kept on insisting until in the end he was allowed to set out. After walking all day, he too came to the king's farm. There stood the king on the steps of his porch and asked him where he was going. And when the lad answered that he was looking for service, the king said that he could serve him and watch his 7 foals. And the king fixed the same punishment and the same reward for him as he had done for his brother. The lad agreed at once and entered the king's service, for he felt sure he could mind the foals and tell the king what they ate and drank. Early next morning at break of day, the groom let loose the 7 foals. Once more they sped over the hill and dale with the lad at their heels. But he did the same as his brother had done before him. After he had raced behind the foals a long, long time, tired and bathed in sweat, he passed a cleft rock where an old woman sat spinning on a distaff. And she called out to the lad, "Come, my fair son, come here and let me louse you." And the lad was willing. The foals he left to run off on their own, and he settled down with the woman under the rock. He sat there, and then he lay there, and idled away the day. When the foals came back towards evening, he was also given a clump of moss and a flask of water to present to the king. When the king asked the lad, "Can you tell me what my 7 foals had to eat and drink?" And the lad showed him the clump of moss and the flask of water, and said, "Here you see their food, and you see their drink." The king got angry again. He gave orders that 3 red strips should be cut off his back and salt rubbed on the wounds, and that he should be turned out and sent home on the spot. And after the lad returned home, he too told them how he had fared. He said that he had gone out to service, and that he would never do so again. On the 3rd day Askelad wished to be off. He wanted to try the task of watching the 7 foals too, he said. The other brothers laughed and jeered at him. "A fine job you'll make of it. We know what your chances are. After what's happened to us, you've never done anything except squat there, poking at the fire and fiddling with the ashes." "Oh, I think I'll set off just the same," said Askelad. "I've made up my mind now." And although the others laughed and his parents implored him to stay, it made no difference. Askelad started on his way. After he had walked all day, he too came to the king's farm at twilight. There stood the king on the steps of his porch and asked him where he was going. "I'm looking for service," said Askelad. "Where do you come from?" asked the king, for now he wanted to know more about those who entered his service. Askelad explained where he came from, and said he was the brother of the 2 who had been sent to watch the king's 7 foals, and then he asked if he could try his luck at watching them next day. "Those rascals," said the king, who grew angry each time he was reminded of them. "If you are a brother of those 2, you must be a good-for-nothing. I've had enough of your sort." "Yes, but seeing I've come all the way here, couldn't you let me have a try too?" said Askelad. "Well, if you're so keen to have your back flayed, it's all the same to me," said the king. "I think I'd rather have the princess," said Askelad. In the morning at daybreak the groom let loose the 7 foals once more, and they sped over hill and dale and through wood and mire with Askelad at their heels. After he had been running along behind them for some time, he too came to the cleft rock. There sat an old woman again, spinning on a distaff, and she called out to Askelad, "Come, my fair son, come here and let me louse you," she said. "Kiss my arse!" shouted Askelad as he leapt and bounded along, holding on to a foal's tail. When they had left the rock behind them, the youngest foal said to him, "Jump up and sit on my back. We have a long way to go yet," and he did so. Then they went on much farther. "Can you see anything?" asked the foal. "No," said Askelad. And when they went on again, "Can you see anything?" asked the foal. "Oh, no," said the lad. And when they had gone on even farther, the foal asked again, "Can you see anything now?" "Yes, now I think I can see something white," said Askelad. "It looks like a great birch stump." "We're going in there," said the foal. When they came to the birch stump, the eldest foal took it and wrenched it to one side, and there was a door where the birch stump had stood. Beyond the door was a small room, and in the room there was barely more than a small hearth and a few stools, but behind the door hung a large rusty sword and a small pitcher. "Can you swing the sword?" asked the foal. Askelad tried, but he could not do so. Then he had to drink from the pitcher, first once, then a second time, then a third time, and then he could wield it easily. "Now you must take the sword with you," said the foal, "and with it you are to cut off the heads of all 7 of us on your wedding day, and so we shall become princes again, as we were before, for we are the brothers of the princess you are to wed. When you can tell the king what we eat and drink, a wicked troll has cast a spell on us and changed us into beasts. After you have cut off our heads, you must take care to place each head on the tail of the body on which it was before. Then the spell will have no more power over us." Askelad promised to do so, and they continued their journey. When they had gone a long, long way, the foal asked, "Can you see anything?" "No," said Askelad. And they kept on going yet a while. "And now," asked the foal, "can you see anything?" "Oh, no," said Askelad. Then they sped along for many, many leagues, both up hill and down dale. "Now," said the foal, "can't you see anything now?" "Oh, yes," said Askelad. "I think I can see a strip of blue far, far away." "Yes, that's the river," said the foal. "We're going to cross it." Over the river there was a fine long bridge, and after they came to the other side they went on much, much farther. Then the foal asked Askelad once more whether he could see anything. Yes, this time he could see something in the dark distance, like a church tower. "We're going in there too," said the foal. When the foals entered the churchyard, they changed into human creatures and appeared as princes, in the richest garments you ever saw. And then they went into the church and received bread and wine from the priest who stood at the altar. Askelad went in with them. After the priest had laid his hands on the princes and blessed them, they went out of the church, and Askelad followed them. And he carried away a flask of wine and a piece of altar bread. As soon as the 7 princes entered the churchyard, they changed into foals again. Then Askelad jumped up and sat on the back of the youngest one, and they went back the same way they had come, but much, much faster. They sped along, first over the bridge, then past Birch Stump, and then past the woman spinning under the rock. And then they went so quickly that Askelad could not hear what the woman shouted after him, but he heard enough to grasp that she was in a furious rage. It was nearly dark when they returned to the king's farm in the evening, and the king himself was standing in the yard waiting for them. "Have you kept faithful watch all day?" said the king to Askelad. "I've done my best," replied Askelad. "Can you tell me what my 7 foals eat and drink?" asked the king. Askelad brought out the altar bread and the flask of wine and showed them to the king. "Here you see their food, and here you see their drink," he said. "Yes, you have kept faithful watch," said the king, "and you shall have the princess and half my kingdom." And the king gave orders to prepare for a wedding that was to be the grandest ever heard of in the land. But while they were sitting at the wedding feast, the bridegroom rose and went out to the stable, saying that he had to fetch something he had forgotten there. Having entered the stable, he did as the foals asked. He cut off the heads of all 7 of them, beginning with the eldest and in proper order down to the youngest. And he took special care to place each head by the tail of the foal to which it belonged, and as he did so they became princes again. When he came into the wedding feast with the 7 princes, the king was so happy that he kissed and embraced Askelad warmly, and his bride loved him even more than she had done before. "You already have half my kingdom," said the king, "and you will get the other half after my death. For my sons can acquire lands and kingdoms of their own, now that they have become princes again. And I can assure you that there was joy and merriment at the wedding. I was there myself, but no one had any time to think of me. All I got to eat was a buttered oat cake, and that I left on the stove. And the cake burnt away, and the butter melted away, and not a crumb remained for me to swallow." Aase, the Goose Girl. Once there was a king who had so many geese that he had to keep a goose herd called Aase. She was known as Aase the Goose Girl. It so happened that the Prince of England was out to seek a wife, and he found Aase sitting in his way. "Good day, little Aase. What are you doing there?" said the prince. "Oh, I'm patching and mending my clothes because I'm expecting the Prince of England today," said Aase. "You can't hope to wed him," said the prince. "Oh, if I meant to have him, I'll have him sure enough," said Aase. Then artists were sent to all the kingdoms of the earth to make portraits of the fairest princess, so the prince might choose among them. One of them pleased him so much that he set out to make her his wife, and he was full of joy when she became his sweetheart. But the prince had with him a magic stone that he placed by his bed, and this stone knew everything. And when the princess came, Aase the Goose Girl told her that if she had a sweetheart before, or if she was troubled by anything she did not want the prince to know, then she had to take care not to step over the magic stone by his bed. "For it will tell him everything about you," she said. When the princess heard this, she grew very disheartened. But then she hit upon the idea of asking Aase to go up instead of her and sleep with the prince that night, and after he fell asleep to change places with her. But then she hit upon the idea of asking Aase to go up instead of her and sleep with the prince that night, and after he fell asleep to change places with her so that he could have his loved one beside him when daylight came, and they did so. When Aase the Goose Girl came in and trod on the stone, the prince asked, "Who is stepping into my bed?" "A maiden, pure and true," said the stone, and they lay down to sleep. But later that night the princess came and took Aase's place. In the morning when it was time to get up, the prince asked the stone once more, "Who is stepping out of my bed?" "One who has had 3 sweethearts," said the stone. On hearing this, the prince would not have her. As you may well imagine, he sent her home again and took another sweetheart instead. When he set out to visit her, he found Aase the Goose Girl sitting in his way again. "Good day, little Aase. What are you doing here?" said the prince. "Oh, I'm patching and mending my clothes because I'm expecting the Prince of England today," said Aase. "You can't hope to wed him," said the prince. "Oh, if I'm meant to have him, I'll wed him sure enough," replied Aase. And the same thing happened to the second princess as to the first, except when she got up in the morning, the magic stone said that she had 6 sweethearts. The prince would not have her either and sent her away. But he thought he would try just once more to see whether he could find a maiden pure and true. He sought far and wide in many lands until he found a princess he liked. But when he set out to visit her, he found Aase the Goose Girl sitting in his way again. "Good day, little Aase. What are you doing there?" said the prince. "Oh, I'm patching and mending my clothes because I'm expecting the Prince of England today," said Aase. "You can't hope to wed him," said the prince. "Oh, yes, if I'm meant to have him, I'll wed him sure enough," said Aase. When the third princess came, Aase the goose girl told her exactly what she had told the first two, that if she had had a sweetheart, or if there was anything else that she did not want the prince to know, then she had to take care not to tread on the magic stone that the prince had by his bed, because it tells him everything, she said. The princess was dejected when she heard this, but she was just as cunning as the other two, and asked Aase to go up instead of her and sleep with the prince that night, and after he fell asleep to change places with her so that he could have his loved one beside him when daylight came, and they did so. When Aase the goose girl came in and trod on the stone, the prince asked, "Who is stepping into my bed?" "A maiden, pure and true," said the stone, and they lay down together. During the night the prince placed a ring on Aase's finger, and it was so tight that she could not get it off. For the prince guessed that something was wrong, and he wanted to have a token by which he could recognize his true love. After the prince had fallen asleep, the princess came in and sent Aase down to the goose pen and took her place. In the morning, when it was time to get up, the prince asked, "Who is stepping out of my bed?" "One who has had 9 sweethearts," said the stone. And on hearing this, the prince became so angry that he turned the princess out on the spot. And he asked the magic stone to explain the mystery of these princesses who had been stepping in and out. It was all quite beyond him, he said. The stone then told him the tale of how 3 princesses had deceived him and sent Aase the goose girl in their stead. But the prince wanted to find out for himself, so he went down to where Aase sat watching her geese to see whether or not she had the ring, because he thought if she did he had better make her his queen. When he met her, he noticed at once that she had tied a strip of cloth round one of her fingers, and he asked her why she had done so. "Oh, I've cut my finger so badly," said Aase the goose girl. He insisted on seeing her finger, but Aase would not remove the cloth. The prince seized the finger. Aase tried to draw it back, and then the cloth came off, and he recognized his ring. Then he took her to the royal dwelling and gave her rich garments and fine jewels, and afterwards they were married. And so it happened that Aase the goose girl wed the Prince of England after all, because she was meant to have him. The boy who became a lion, a falcon, and an ant. Once upon a time there was a man who had only one son and who lived in wretched poverty. But before he breathed his last breath, he called his son to him and told him that all he had to leave him was a sword, a piece of sackcloth, and a handful of breadcrumbs. After his death, the young lad wished to set out and seek his fortune in the wide world. So he belted on the sword, and he packed the breadcrumbs in a sackcloth for food, as his home was in a lonely place far up on a wooded hillside. His way lay across a mountain, and when he had climbed high enough to get a view of the moorland beyond, he saw a lion, a falcon, and an ant quarreling over a dead horse. The boy grew pale at the sight of the lion, but it called to him to come and settle their quarrel and share out the horse so that each might get his due. The boy took his sword and divided the horse as best he could. The lion he gave the large joints, the falcon he gave the liver and lights and other tidbits, and the ant got the head. And having done so, he said, "Now I think each has had his fair share. The lion should get the most, for he is biggest and strongest. The falcon should get the best, for he is such a dainty feeder. And the ant should get the skull, for he likes creeping in nooks and corners." They were all very pleased to have the horse shared out in this way, and they asked him what he wanted for making such a just settlement. "If I have been service to you and you are satisfied, I am happy enough," he said, "and I want no payment." But they all said he deserved something. "If there is nothing else you want," said the lion, "you can have 3 wishes." But the boy did not know what to wish for. Then the lion asked him if he would like to wish he could turn into a lion, and the other 2 asked him if he would like to be able to turn into a falcon and an ant. The boy thought this would be useful, and he made the 3 wishes. He threw aside his sword and sackcloth, changed into a falcon, and began to fly. He kept on flying till he was above a great lake, but far out over the lake he started to feel so tired and his wings were so sore that he could fly no longer, and then he caught sight of a rocky crag rising out of the water. There he stopped and rested. It was a strange-looking crag, and he spent a while exploring it. After he had rested, he turned into a little falcon again, and flew on until he reached the king's farm. There he settled on a tree outside the window where the princess lived. As soon as she saw the bird, she wanted to catch it. She coaxed it to come to her at once, and when the falcon was in her chamber, she was all ready to slam the window shut, and in a twinkling she had the bird in a cage. When night came, the boy changed into an ant and crept out of the cages, and then he became a boy again and went and sat with the princess. And she got such a fright that she screamed and woke the king, who came in to ask what was the matter. "There's someone here," cried the princess, and by that time the boy had become an ant, crept into the cage, and turned into a falcon again. The king could not find any cause for alarm, and so he told his daughter that she must have been troubled by a nightmare. But no sooner had the king left the room than the boy did the same again. He crept out of the cage as an ant, became himself once more again, and sat beside the princess. She gave a loud scream, and the king came in again to see what was the matter. "There's someone here," cried the princess. But the boy darted into the cage once more and sat there as a falcon. The king looked about and hunted high and low, and when he found nothing he grew angry at having his night's rest disturbed, and he told his daughter she was talking nonsense. "If you scream again," he said, "I'll make you realize you've got a king for a father." But scarcely had the king closed the door behind him when the boy was beside the princess again. This time she did not scream, though she was so afraid that she did not know which way to turn. And the boy asked her why she was so frightened. She told him that she was promised to a big troll, and on the very first day she walked in the open air the troll was to come and carry her off, and when the boy had appeared in her chamber she thought it was the big troll. Every Thursday morning the troll sent an envoy, and that envoy was a dragon, to whom the king had to yield 9 fat swine each time it came. And therefore he had proclaimed that whoever could free him from the dragon should be given the princess in marriage and half the kingdom. The boy said he would do this, and the next morning the princess went to the king, and told him there was someone there who was willing to free him from the dragon and the tribute. The boy said he would do this, and the next morning the princess went to the king and told him there was someone who was willing to free him from the dragon and the tribute of swine. The king was pleased to hear this, for the dragon had eaten up so many swine that there was scarcely any left in all the kingdom. It happened to be a Thursday that day, and so the boy went to where the dragon came each week to receive the swine. One of the tillers from the king's farm showed him the way. Soon enough the dragon came along. It had 9 heads, and it was so full of fury when there were no sign of its meal of pork that it spat out fiery flames and charged at the boy as if it was to swallow him alive. But in a twinkling the boy became a lion, and he fought with the dragon, and tore off one head after the other. The dragon was strong too, and it spouted blazing venom, but at length it only had 1 head left, and that was the mightiest. The boy kept on fighting until he tore the last head off as well, and that was the end of the dragon. Then he went to the king with the news, and there was rejoicing in the household, and the princess was to be his bride. But one day, when they were walking in the garden, the big troll suddenly came upon them and seized the princess and flew off with her through the air. The boy wanted to set out after them at once, but the king would not let him, because he had no one else left now that his daughter was gone. Still, for all the king's orders and all the king's prayers, the boy would not stay. He changed into a falcon and sped off. By now they were out of sight, but he remembered the mysterious crag where he had rested during his first flight. He swooped down and settled there, changed into an ant and crept through a chink in the rock. After crawling a long while, he came to a door that was locked. He knew how to get through it, as he could creep in through the keyhole, and the next thing he saw was a strange princess lousing a big troll with 3 heads. This must be the right way, the boy thought to himself, for he had heard that the king had lost 2 other daughters whom trolls had carried off. Maybe I can find the second daughter too, he said to himself, and crept through the keyhole of the next door. There sat another strange princess, lousing a big troll with 6 heads, and then he crept through another keyhole, and there sat the youngest princess, lousing a big troll with 9 heads. He crawled up the calf of her leg and pinched her, and she knew it was the lad wanting to speak to her, and so she asked the big troll for leave to go outside. When she came out, the boy appeared in his own shape. He told her to ask the big troll whether she would ever be able to go home to her father again. Then he became an ant and settled on her foot, and the princess went in and began lousing the big troll once more. After a while she became lost in thought.
"You are forgetting to louse me,"
said the troll.
"What are you wondering about?"
"Oh, I'm wondering whether I shall ever leave here and return to my father's house," said the princess.
"No, you never will,"
said the big troll.
"Not unless someone finds the grain of sand that lies under the 9th tongue and the 9th head of the dragon to whom your father sent tribute. But no one will find it. If that grain of sand comes over this rock, all the trolls will burst and the rock will become a golden castle, and the lake will turn into fields and meadows."
As soon as he heard this, the boy crept out again through all the keyholes, and up through the crack in the rock. There he became a falcon and flew to where the dragon lay, and he searched until he found the grain of sand under the 9th tongue and the 9th head, and he flew off with it. But when he reached the lake, he was so weary that he had to sink down and rest on a stone by the shore. And while he was sitting there, he just dozed for a moment, and at that moment the grain of sand fell from his beak down on the sandy shore. He had to search for 3 days before he found it again, but when he found it, he sped off to the crag with it and dropped it through the crack in the rock. Then all the trolls burst, the crag split asunder, and a golden castle appeared, the fairest castle in all the world, and the lake changed into the most beautiful fields and the greenest meadows you could wish to see. And so they all returned to the king's dwelling, where there was no end of rejoicing. The boy and the youngest princess were made husband and wife, and there were revels throughout the kingdom for 7 whole weeks to celebrate their wedding. And if they did not fare well, I only hope that you may fare better. Rumble, Mumble, Goose Egg. Once there were 5 women reaping in a field, and each one was childless and wanted a child of her own. All of a sudden they came upon a huge goose egg as big as a man's head. "I saw it first," said one. "I saw it just as soon as you did," shouted another. By cripes, I mean to have it. I was the one that saw it first, swore a third. And they went on squabbling over the egg and were ready to tear each other's hair. In the end, they agreed to keep it, all 5 of them, and sit on it in a goose fashion and hatch out the gosling. The first one sat there for a week like a broody goose and had an easy time of it and did no work at all, while the others had to toil hard to feed themselves and her too. Then one of them cursed her for being so lazy. You couldn't twitter till you'd been in the egg a while yourself, said the one who was brooding. But this egg is at least something human, for it seems to be mumbling. Herring and gruel and porridge and milk, over and over and over again, she said. And now you can sit on it for a week, and we can take it in turns to feed you. After the 5th woman had been sitting on there brooding for a week, she could hear beyond doubt that there was a creature inside the egg, shouting, herring and gruel and porridge and milk, and so she picked a hole in the eggshell. But instead of a gosling, there burst forth a human child as ugly as could be, with a big head and a little body. And his first cry on coming out of the egg was, herring and gruel and porridge and milk, so they called him Rumble Mumble Goose Egg. Though he was such an ugly fellow, they were all fond of him at first, but in no time he became so greedy that he ate up all the food they had. Whenever they made a dish of gruel or a pot of porridge that they thought would satisfy the 6 of them, the youngster tipped it up and gulped down the lot. Then they did not want to keep him any longer. I haven't had a decent feed since that blasted imp crawled out of his shell, said one of them. And when Rumble Mumble Goose Egg heard the others complain too, he told them he was ready to leave. If they could do without him, he could do without them, and off he went. He walked far until he came to a farm surrounded by stony land. There he went in and asked for service. It seemed they were in need of a labourer, and the old gaffer told him to clear stones from the fields, and Rumble Mumble Goose Egg picked up the stones. He collected big ones that made up several cartloads each, and he put the whole lot, both big and small, in his pockets. He finished the job soon enough and went back to find out what he was to do next. Clear away the stones from the field, said the farmer. You can't tell me you've finished when you've hardly begun. But Rumble Mumble Goose Egg emptied his pockets and threw all the stones in a heap. When the farmer saw that he had done the work already, he felt he ought to watch his step with such a strong man, and told him he had better come in and have something to eat. This suited Rumble Mumble down to the ground, and he cleaned up the meal prepared for the household and the servants, and still he had not had half enough. There was nobody to match him as a worker, but there was nobody to match him as an eater either. Feeding him was like pouring water through a sieve, thought the old gaffer. A worker like that could eat a poor farmer out of house and home in 3 shakes of a lamb's tail, he said to himself. He had no more work for him. It was best for him to go to the king's farm. Rumble Mumble Goose Egg went off to the king and was taken on at once. On that farm there was food and work enough. He was to run errands and help the maids carry wood and water and do other odd jobs. He asked what he was to do first. He could start by splitting up a bit of firewood, they said. Rumble Mumble Goose Egg set to work and split and chopped and sent the splinters flying. In a jiffy he had chopped up all the wood he could find, firewood and timber and wood set aside for plants and tools, and when he had finished he came along and asked what they wanted him to do next. Finish chopping the wood, they said. There isn't any more, said Rumble Mumble. There must be more, thought the bailiff, and he went and took a look at the woodshed. But Rumble Mumble Goose Egg had chopped up the lot and made firewood of the planks and timber logs. The bailiff said that this was a disgrace, and that he would not get a bite to eat till he had been to the forest and felled as much timber as he had split into firewood. Rumble Mumble Goose Egg ran down to the forge and got the smith to help him make an axe 500 weight of iron, and so he went off to the forest and cleared it. He cut down mast timber and beam timber of spruce and pine, everything he could find in the king's forest, and in the neighboring forest as well. He left the tops and branches on, and all the trees looked as if they had been swept down by a whirlwind. Then he piled a mighty load on the sledge and harnessed all the horses in front, but they could not make it budge, and as he tugged at the bridle to get the load moving, he pulled all their heads off. So he tossed the horses out of the shafts and drew the load home himself. When he reached the king's dwelling, the king and his forester were standing on the porch waiting to have a word with him about the way he had treated the forest. For the forester had been along there and seen it for himself, but as soon as Rumble Mumble Goose Egg came home dragging half the forest behind him, the king grew vexed and alarmed and thought he had better be cautious with such a strong man. You're a crack worker, said the king, but how much do you eat at a time? You must be hungry now. There went 12 tubs of a meal to a portion of porridge for him, said Rumble Mumble Goose Egg, though once he had made an end of that, there was no need to feed him for a while. It took some time to make as much porridge as this. In the meantime, he had to bring in a load of wood for the cook. He stacked the whole wood pile on a sledge, but as he was pulling it through the door, he was a bit rough again. The wall timbers were all pushed askew, the corners slipped out of joint, and the whole house nearly fell down. When the dinner was just about ready, they sent him to call in the men. He shouted so loud that the hills echoed all around, but he thought the men were too slow in coming, so he had a scrap with them and knocked the life out of 12. He knocked the life out of 12, said the king. And he eats much more, 12 times 12? But how much work do you do, my boy? Oh, much more than 12 times 12, said Rumble Mumble. After he had had his dinner, he was sent to the barn to thresh corn. He lifted the ridgepole off the roof to use as a flail, and when the roof started collapsing, he took a giant spruce with all its branches and put it along the ridge of the roof instead, and then he threshed grain and straw and hay all together. This did not turn out well, for both corn and chaff were whirled through the air and spread like a cloud all over the farm. When he had almost got the threshing done, an enemy invaded the country, and the king was at war. So the king told him to take some men with him and march against the army and meet them in battle, as the king was sure the enemy would kill him. No, he would not hear of any men losing their lives. He would fight alone, said Rumble-Mumble-Goose-Egg. All the better, thought the king. The sooner I'll be rid of him. But he had to have a good strong club. They sent forth the smith, and he forged a club of 200 weight. Rumble-Mumble-Goose-Egg said it was good enough to crack nuts with, so the smith forged a club of 500 weight. And Rumble-Mumble-Goose-Egg said it was good enough to sole shoes with. The smith said it was the biggest job his men could do, and so Rumble-Mumble-Goose-Egg went down to the forge himself and made a club of 2 tons. And it took 100 men to turn it on the anvil. Rumble-Mumble-Goose-Egg thought he could make do with this. Then he had to have a knapsack, and they made one of 15 ox hides and packed it with food, and off he tramped down the hill with his sack on his back and his club on his shoulder. When he came within sight of the enemy, they sent a messenger to ask whether he was ready for battle. "Wait till I have had a bite to eat," said Rumble-Mumble-Goose-Egg. Then he sat down on the ground behind his big knapsack and began his meal. But the enemy could not wait. They started firing at once, and the bullets showered down on him like hailstones. "I can do without all this chicken feed," said Rumble-Mumble-Goose-Egg, and took out another helping. Both lead and steel bounced off him, and his knapsack gave cover like a rampart. And so they started throwing grenades and shooting cannonballs. He winced each time one touched him. "There's no need to tickle me," he said. But then he got a grenade stuck in his throat. "Ugh," he said, and spat it out. And next there came a chain shot that cut off his butter box, and then another chain shot carried off a sandwich he was holding in his hand. And then he got angry and jumped up and seized his big club and drummed it on the ground. And he asked them if they meant to keep blowing the bread out of his mouth with their pea shooters. And he beat upon the ground so the hills and mountains trembled and the enemy were scattered like chaff. And that was the end of the war. When he came back again and asked for more work, the king grew pale, for this time he had hoped to be rid of him. The only thing he could think of was to send him to hell. "Go off to Old Nick and collect the rent," he said. And off went Rumble-Mumble-Goose-Egg with the sack on his back and his club on his shoulder, and he made a quick journey of it. But when he got there, Old Nick was busy hearing the catechism for confirmation. There was no one at home but his mother, and she said that she had never heard of any rent owing, and he had better come back later. "Tomorrow, I suppose," he said, knowing it was all nonsense. He made it clear that once he was there, he meant to stay until he got the rent, and he had plenty of time to wait. But after he had eaten his meal, time began to drag. So he called to get the rent from the devil's mother again, and told her she had to pay up straight away. She refused point blank. She would no more budge than the great pine, she said, and stood outside the gate of hell, and 15 men could scarcely put their arms around it. But Rumble-Mumble darted up to the top of the pine, and bent and twisted it like a willow wind, and asked her whether she would pay the rent now. She dared not do otherwise, and in a trice she found as many coins as Rumble-Mumble could carry in his sack. He took the rent and ran off towards home, and no sooner had he left than Old Nick came back. When he heard that Rumble-Mumble had made off with a big sack of money, he stopped first to wallop his mother, and then he set out to catch up with him. And he soon drew near, for he had no load and could fly through the air whenever he chose, whereas Rumble-Mumble had to keep to the ground with his heavy sack. But as Old Nick came hurrying at his heels, he put a spurt on and raced as fast as he could, brandishing his club to keep him off. And so they ran on, with Rumble-Mumble holding the handle tight and Old Nick grabbing at the end of the club until they came to a deep valley. There Rumble-Mumble leapt from one mountain top to the other, and Old Nick flew after him in such a rush that he dashed blindly against the club and tumbled down into the valley and broke off his foot, and there he lay. "Here's your rent," said Rumble-Mumble-Goose-Egg, when he reached the king's dwelling, and he tossed the sack at the king's feet, and the porch shook with the crash. The king thanked him and made a fine speech, and promised him a rich reward and a safe journey home if he wished, but Rumble-Mumble-Goose-Egg only wanted more work. "What do you want me to do next?" he asked. The king scratched his head and then told him to go to the big troll, who had stolen his grandfather's sword and who lived in the castle by the sea that no one dared approach. Rumble-Mumble packed some bundles of food in his knapsack, and off he went again. And he traveled a long, long way across forests and mountains and wild hills until he came to some tall rocks that were the home of the troll that had taken the king's grandfather's sword. But the troll was nowhere to be seen, and the rocks were shut, and he could not find a way in. Then he fell in with some quarrymen from a mountain farm, who were quarrying stone in this rocky country. They had never had such help before. He broke up the mountain face and split the rocks and sent boulders as big as houses toppling down. But when it was time for him to rest and have his dinner, he went to open one of his bundles and found it had all been eaten up. "I've a good appetite myself," said Rumble-Mumble, "but whoever has been here has a better one. He has swallowed the bones as well." So the first day passed, and on the second things were no better. On the third day he set out to break stones again, and took the third bundle with him, but this time he lay down behind it and pretended to be asleep. All of a sudden the mountain opened, and out came a troll with 7 heads and began gobbling the food in his bundle.
"Now I can have a good talking,"
said the troll. "That's still to be settled," said Rumble-Mumble, and he struck him with his club and knocked off his 7 heads. Then he went inside the mountain the troll had come from, and there he found a horse eating from a tub of red-hot embers, and behind it was a tub of oats. "Why don't you eat the oats?" said Rumble-Mumble Goose-Egg. "Because I can't turn around," said the horse. "I can turn you round," said Rumble-Mumble. "I'd rather you tore off my head," said the horse. He did so, and the horse became a fair young man. He told him that he had been bewitched and changed into a horse by the troll, and he helped him find the sword that the troll had hidden at the bottom of the bed, and in the bed the troll's mother lay snoring away. They set out homewards across the sea, and when they had left the shore the troll's mother came after them. She could not catch them, and so she began drinking water. And she drank so much that the level of the water sank, but she could not manage to drink up all the ocean, and in the end she burst. As soon as they landed, Rumble-Mumble Goose-Egg sent word to the king asking him to fetch the sword. He sent 4 horses, but they could not move it. He sent 8, and then he sent 12, and still the sword stayed where it was, and they could not make it stir an inch. So Rumble-Mumble Goose-Egg picked it up and carried it back himself. The king could not believe his eyes when he saw Rumble-Mumble again, but he made a fine speech and promised him the earth and the moon, and when Rumble-Mumble wanted more work, he told him to go to the enchanted castle where no one dared to stay, and to make it his home until he had built a bridge over the sound so that people could get across. If he could do that, the king would reward him well, and even give him his daughter, he said, and Rumble-Mumble Goose-Egg said he would do it. No one had ever returned from that spot alive. Those who had tried to reach the castle laid slaughtered and torn to smithereens, and the king was certain he would have seen the last of him once he had gotten there. But Rumble-Mumble set off. He took with him a sack of food, and a good hard stump of pine, a small axe, a wedge, and some kindling wood, and lastly the little pauper boy from the king's farm. When he reached the sound, the river was full of ice, and roaring like a cataract, but he planted his feet firmly on the bottom, and waded across. At last he was over, and on the other side. After he had warmed himself by the fire and eaten his supper, he was ready for a night's sleep. Then all of a sudden he heard a terrible din, and it sounded as if the whole castle was being turned upside down, and the door was swung wide open, and all he could see was the gaping jaw as big as the doorway. "Here's a mouthful for you, try that," said Rumble-Mumble, and tossed the pauper boy into a yawning gap. "But let me get a good look at you, maybe we've met before." They had met before, for it was Old Nick again, and they started playing cards because he wanted to try and win back some of the money Rumble-Mumble had got out of his mother when he collected the king's rent. Somehow Rumble-Mumble kept winning, and he took care to mark the best cards, and after he won all the ready cash, Old Nick had to give Rumble-Mumble the gold and silver from the castle. All at once the fire went out, and they could not see to play. "We'll have to cut some wood," said Rumble-Mumble. He struck the stump of pine with his axe and drove in the wedge, but the old log was gnarled and tough, and would not quite split, though Rumble-Mumble prized and wrenched with his axe. "You're supposed to be strong," he said to Old Nick. "Spit on your hands and dig in your claws, and let's see if you can wrench this log apart," he said. Old Nick got to work and dived his hands into the crack, and wrenched as hard as he could. At that moment Rumble-Mumble Goose-Egg drove out the wedge, and he had Old Nick caught in a tight spot, and then he tried out his axe head on his back. Old Nick begged him to be set free, but Rumble-Mumble Goose-Egg turned a deaf ear until he promised that he would never come and harry there again. And he also had to promise to build a bridge over the sound so that people could cross it at all times of the year, and it was ready to be soon as the ice melted. "Those are hard terms," said Old Nick, but he still had no choice. If he wanted to be free, he had to make this promise, but he struck a bargain that he was to get the first soul that crossed the bridge. That soul was to be paid to him as a toll. Rumble-Mumble agreed to this, and Old Nick was set free, and sped off home. Rumble-Mumble Goose-Egg went to bed to sleep on it all, and he was still asleep late next day. When the king came to see whether he had been chopped up or just torn to pieces, he had to wade through gold and silver before he could get to the bed. Sacks of it lay heaped along the walls, and in the bed Rumble-Mumble was snoring soundly. "Heaven help me and my daughter," he said. Once he realized Rumble-Mumble was alive and kicking, well, there was no denying that a splendid job had been done. He said, but there could scarcely be any talk of a wedding until after that bridge had been built. One fine day the bridge was all finished, and on it stood Old Nick waiting for his toll as promised in the bargain. Rumble-Mumble Goose-Egg wanted to take the king with him to try out the bridge, but he did not like the idea, so he mounted a horse himself, and swung up on the front of his saddle the enormous lump of a dairy woman who kept the king's cows. She looked just like a huge stump of pine, and the bridge thundered as he rode across. "Where is my toll? Where is the soul?" shouted Old Nick. "In this lump of pine wood here, if you want it. Spit on your hands and catch it," said Rumble-Mumble Goose-Egg.
"Oh no, thanks. If she won't have me, I won't have her," said Old Nick. "You've had me in a tight spot before, and I'm not being caught again."
And in a flash he flew straight home to his old mother and has never been heard of since. But Rumble Mumble Goose Egg hurried off to the king's farm to claim the reward that the king had promised. And when the king shillied and shallied and tried to go back on his word, Rumble Mumble said that he had better prepare a sizable sack of food, and then he would collect his reward himself. The king gave orders for this to be done, and as soon as the sack was ready, Rumble Mumble took the king out to the threshold and gave him a good solid whack that sent him sailing up into the air. He hurled the sack of food after him so that he not go hungry, and unless they have come down again, the king and his knapsack are still sailing along between the heavens and the earth till this very day.